Hey guys, I'm Rachel O'Leary and it's time for a Tuesday tip. I thought that this week I would talk to you a little bit about hardscape choices because I'm working on some commission tanks for a few folks and I have to lay some out. So I thought I'd just talk to you about the various materials I keep on hand, some of the pros and cons, and the decision making that goes into planning a new tank. I think what is most important is to first figure out your goals before you start the tank. For instance, in my fish room, I have very utilitarian tanks for the most part. I'm in and out of them all the time netting, so I need to be able to move my hardscape and plants easily to be able to catch fish. Now that's not going to be the case for most of you. Or maybe it is. So for tanks like that, the main purpose of the decor and the plants are to provide comfort for the fish. They aid in nitrification and absorbing impurities in the water. They add some visual interest. They may stain the water, and they provide comfort for the fish for them to exhibit better color and be more prone to breeding. For instance, when I set up one of my dwarf cichlid tanks, I use a lot of various driftwoods and plants that inhabit all levels of the aquarium. This gives them a lot of different surfaces to choose from to spawn on or underneath, as well as giving them comfort and places to hide from each other when things can get a little tough in the love nest. So some of the different materials that I like to keep on hand, and I have a hoarding problem, much to the chagrin of my family, are various woods and rocks. Now, I use different woods for different purposes. Many of these you can purchase right in your local fish store. For instance, Malaysian Driftwood is probably the easiest to find. It's generally kind of stumpy and is this uniform brown color. This stuff is great if you're setting up a tank for breeding plecos or even dwarf cichlids. It usually has these little cave-like structures that make it very easy to set up different breeding territories for them. Also, ancestris or other plecos really like to graze on this wood and it holds up well over time. I don't find it to be nearly as visually appealing as some of the other types, but I do keep a fair amount of this on hand for my tanks. It's very easy to remove, it has big surfaces for gluing plants to, and it's a great utilitarian tool for a breeding tank. Another option is this red spiderwood. Now this is one of the bigger, clunkier roots, and I would utilize this just like I would this Malaysian. It's got a nice color, but it's not particularly dynamic in my mind. You could certainly make it more so, depending on how you place it. The same kind of wood, but a different part, is the spiderwood, and this is more of a root ball. So it has these directional branches going everywhere, and it's pretty attractive and definitely dynamic, but for me, this would not be very helpful to have in a tank that I need to net in because all these little branches would get stuck on my net and be a pain in the butt. However, it does provide some really great hidey holes either for fish or to place plants in your scape. Mopani wood is often easy to find as well, and it has this nice striation of color. It's an African root wood. Again, a little bit clunkier than like that spiderwood root ball, but definitely very useful in a breeding tank. Now my favorite for aquascaping is Manzanita Driftwood, and this is collected out in the deserts in the western US, and it just is extremely dynamic and directional. It often has really great twists and turns and a great sort of transition from the rootier pieces into these little branchy pieces. Now, if you were to be stocking something like discus, for instance, you'd probably want to avoid this because discus can be pretty prone to darting, and these little tiny sharp edges would scrape up their sides. So that's another consideration. I also like to use a lot of rock in my tanks, and this is for a few reasons. Again, the hidey holes and breeding surfaces, especially for a lot of my dwarf Asian hill stream fishes. They like to excavate under rocks or utilize the surface of rocks for their breeding strategies. I also find them to be very useful for applying food. I feed a lot of gelatinized foods, and these smooth river rocks are great for applying that so that you can give the fish a really natural way to eat. However, they're not as attractive as they could be. Granted, there's a lot of variability, But the nice thing about these is you can often collect them out of a local waterway or go to your local quarry and find something that is comparable that will work for you. And they're very inexpensive or free if you collect them. Often sold in pet stores is this rainbow rock, which can be good for shoving plants into. For me, it doesn't have a particularly natural appeal, although it is very useful, and I keep it on hand. But my favorite is utilizing dragonstone or other aquascaping stones that have this like really strong directional pull, lots of holes for wedging plants into, and just really can create a very dynamic look, similar to the Manzanita. So what I do when I'm planning a new tank is, let's say that this one is going to be it's based on the aquascape. My goal of this tank is that I want a really dynamic hardscape with some beautiful plants. What I do is I tape out the dimensions of my tank wherever all my hardscape materials are, and then I just start playing around to find what works and what appeals to me. Now, it's important when you're doing this that you take a lot of process pictures along the way so that if you find a look that you like, you can recreate it in your tank. If you're doing this for a large tank that has a center brace, it's really best to dry fit in the tank. That way you can make sure that the pieces you want to use will physically fit into the tank. I have a lot of obstacles with that in my fish room because I have the stepped rack system and I only have so many inches to be able to fit my hardscape materials into my aquariums. In today's, I'm going to be trying to roughly recreate the little 2.6 gallon spec that I just did a few weeks ago for a customer who would like to purchase it. So I've gathered together a whole bunch of my various stones, and I'm just going to sit and play and try and recreate that directional pull with a tall piece and some supporting figures and some directional groundwork. With the dragon stone in particular, it's really important that you pay attention that the stones sort of match each other in character so that they're flowing in the right directions, either against each other or with each other. So I'll simply start by picking my largest piece or my focal piece, and I really like this one. And one of the obstacles to dry fitting is that you can't always support the rock the way you would in your aquarium because you don't have any substrate to push underneath it. So I'm going to use a little support stone to sort of hold this one up. Now in the aquarium I would bank the substrate in the back corner and I would be able to elevate it higher. Now I need to find some stones that complement this one that are directional that will work together. Generally speaking, I like to do my groupings of rocks in odd numbers. It just seems to make sense to me, and I like them to sort of taper down in scale. So I'm going to choose these three, I think, as my main character stones. Now again, I'm trying to pay attention to the pull of the stone and the direction of the stone. So in the aquarium, I would bank the substrate underneath these. And you know, I think it's important for people to remember that hardscape materials don't go bad. If you're in a store or at a shop where you can purchase these and you see something that really speaks to you, grab it. I literally leave my stuff sitting outside until I'm ready to use it. And it's really nice to have sort of a nice hoard of materials to pick through when you're feeling inspired to create. So I need to grab a few more little support stones for this, but so far it's not bad. So I'm gonna go grab a few more tiny pieces. And again, when I would put this in my actual aquascape, I would use my substrate to work things out. Alright, so as I mentioned, it's important to take pictures throughout the way in order to remember what you did, how it looks, to be able to recreate it in your aquarium. Now let me bring you guys around so that you can see what I've thrown together here, and you saw how fast that was. Now this would need some tweaking in the aquarium. So this is what I'm going to send to my customer, and I'll box it up and send him the pictures as well so that he can try and recreate what I did here. Now for this aquarium, I'll be placing plants inside all these crevices to sort of fill in that central part, and I would advise him to bank the substrate pretty deep in the back and have it relatively thin in the front. Thanks for watching. Make sure you stop by my Facebook as well as my website, MsJinx.com, where you can find my upcoming speaking engagements, my current stock list, and information on all things nano. If you have any comments or suggestions for things you'd like to see on Tuesday Tips, let me know. I'm going to continue this series, I think, talking about the choices of different substrates, as well as how to set up different tanks for different purposes. So as I mentioned, I feel kind of bad for my family. This is just a fraction of the aquascaping materials I have hoarded. I have them all over the fish room. I have them stashed around the yard in various gardens. But I just can't seem to help myself. When I become inspired, I have to have it. And, you know, I sell this as well. But it's really, really nice to have a lot of materials to pick through when you're trying to plan a new tank.